From the air, coral reefs resemble a monumental work of infrastructure designed to provide biological and ecological services, but also economical and recreational benefits. But underneath this apparently strong protective surface, a deadly threat is ravaging the corals. Stony coral tissue loss disease, a virulent sickness that is killing coral reefs in Florida and the Caribbean. For scientists, it is more serious than diseases they have seen in the past because it's much more deadly and it doesn't seem to be contained.
With stony coral tissue loss disease, I compare it to Ebola because there's a much higher mortality rate. It's something that occurs, it just continues in the population, and it will kill large numbers of corals.
First reported in Florida in 2014, affecting more than 20 different types of reef-building coral species to this date.
Stony coral tissue loss disease is a rapid tissue loss disease of corals. We call it a rapid tissue loss disease because what happens is it kills the tissue of the coral animal and makes it essentially liquefy and fall off of the coral. With coral bleaching, the coral animal can recover. So the algae can come back in because the tissue's still there, and the coral can actually recover and be fine after a certain period of time. With stony coral tissue loss disease, the tissue actually dies. So the coral animal itself dies and does not recover. The disease itself, we think, emerged in 2014 off the coast of Florida near the port of Miami. Around 2015, it became apparent that this disease was something different. The interesting thing about stony coral tissue loss disease is it's affecting species that haven't traditionally been very susceptible to disease in the past. Things like the brain corals, which we've seen be resilient to many diseases. The brain corals are affected first by this disease, and they are really badly affected too. Other species that are highly affected include the pillar corals and the maze corals. So these are corals that form the foundation of a lot of the reef structure. Also, some of the star corals, which are the primary framework builders for Caribbean coral reefs, so that means they build the structure, the real structure of the reef. These corals are also affected by the disease.
By 2017, it was found in Jamaica. It has since appeared in Mexico, St. Martin, St. Thomas, Turks and Caicos Islands, Dominican Republic, Belize, and St. Eustatius. Here in St. Thomas, the stony coral tissue loss disease has killed half of the coral cover in a period of 7 months.
We believe the primary mechanism of transmission is just water transport. So we believe the disease is waterborne and is spreading with the currents in the marine environment. We know that obviously whole populations of corals are being wiped out by this disease. So in Florida, the pillar coral in the upper Florida Keys is now extinct because of this disease. As of right now, we don't have enough information to say what the direct impacts on fish species are from the loss of coral. We know that when corals have died off in the past in smaller areas and smaller amounts, you do see changes in the fish communities that have to do with habitat structure. So as the living coral dies, you start to lose some of the structure of the reef. And that structure is really important for housing animals that fish like to eat. So you often see things like parrotfish and groupers go away from reefs that have died because there's no longer the food sources that they like to eat there. Because of stony coral tissue loss disease, we're going to see these changes again, but at a much larger scale because this disease is affecting more species at faster rates, and there's been more mortality because of stony coral tissue loss disease than anything we've seen in the past. Things like fisheries and tourism that coral reefs help to support, those things will be affected. So the economic impacts could be quite large. Coral reefs also provide shoreline protection, and we know that reefs that are dead do not provide the same level of protection as reefs that have living corals and other species growing on them that are dependent on the corals. So we know that those kind of major storm events and major impacts that aren't day to day but do occur will have more severe impacts because of the loss of corals. So that's what we're expecting to see more frequently now with climate change and with continued development for human infrastructure, is the emergence of these very severe diseases, because you have these multiple stressors happening that cause conditions that are just ripe for these superbugs to emerge.
Key factors of the infectious disease include large spatial scales, high rates of transmission, and rapid mortality. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, researchers are simultaneously trying to identify pathogens, advance in understandings of the disease, and focus in coral asexual reproduction in nurseries by taking healthy fragments of highly susceptible corals and growing them in a controlled atmosphere to replant the reef in the near future. Other coral restoration efforts include on-site treatment and culling of affected corals.
So this is a piece of boulder brain coral, and this is one that has a little bit of disease on it. You can see where the tissue has receded, where this white skeleton is exposed. As a last-ditch effort to try to save this piece in the laboratory, we'll fragment off the diseased portion, leaving only the healthy tissue. And sometimes it works, sometimes they survive, other times it doesn't work. But it's kind of a last-ditch effort to save them in the laboratory.
Fragmenting, antibiotic paste, and other types of treatments are being applied in the effort to halt the progression of the lesions.
The antibiotic paste can stop the disease on one coral, and you can have an army of people treat several hundred corals at a reef. But what's happening is these reefs have millions of corals on them, and you can't treat them all. But right now, we don't have a solution to this. We have a program called the Hunt for Coral Disease, and that's a program where people, if they see something odd going on with the coral, they can report it. They can place the report on the map, so they can select the site where they were on the map, and then that report gets sent to us with any photographs, and we can go back out to that site and check on it. We're also asking the fishing community to do this because they're often in the water, that if they see anything odd happening on the reefs where they're fishing, to report back to us and let us know what's going on.
Fishers are bringing in the information if they're seeing the spread of the disease in any of the different areas that we haven't seen it before, so we're collaborating with the scientists. For the fishers, outreach and education is very important. We have attended several meetings here in the Virgin Islands concerning the stony coral disease, and we need to know what's going on. Not only do we need to bring them the information, but we need to get the information from them that they're finding, and also at the same time, the interaction with the fishers can bring ideas and solutions that they themselves have in trying to mitigate the process of the stony coral disease.
What we're hoping is that people will be trained to identify the disease early. What we've been working with the Puerto Rican scientists and managers on is trying to have an early warning system set up for identifying the disease and then being able to respond right away and go out and treat the disease. So it's really just getting prepared, having the resources lined up already, like the antibiotic pastes, and just the necessary equipment to go out and try to remove the disease as it comes in. Other factors that we're asking people to do is that this disease clearly emerged because of the impact of multiple stressors, that trying to alleviate that kind of stress would help the corals be in a healthier condition to kind of withstand the disease. So trying to reduce the impacts of pollution and sediments, trying to reduce the impacts of overfishing, all of that is going to help the corals be healthier, which might help them be more resilient to when the disease comes in.